Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Canto per Canto discussion of Inferno 23. My name's Johnny Wiles. I'm an Italian PhD candidate at Selwyn College, Cambridge. I'm joined by Robin Kirkpatrick, Emeritus Professor of Italian and English Literatures at Cambridge. It's lovely to see you, Robin.
And it's lovely to be here.
Now, I think it's fair to say, Robin, that this has been rather an underloved canto among readers of the Commedia. Would you agree with that?
I think that's exactly right. And we're going to try and correct that, I suppose.
So we have all of about 90 minutes to try and redeem this canto somewhat in the eyes and minds of our viewers.
It's such a brilliant canto that we should be able to do it in 30 seconds flat. So.
Well, let's hope. So it might be good before we jump into our redemption mission to perhaps remind ourselves and our viewers where we are at this point in the poem. Shall I take a moment to situate us?
Yes, please do.
All right. We are in the 8th circle of hell, the circle of fraud, which, as our viewers I'm sure will remember, is divided up into 10 pockets or bolge. We start this canto in the 5th bolge, the bolge of the bariters, and then we then move with literally torrential swiftness into the 6th of the bolge, the bolge of the hypocrites. There we are. Have I missed anything important out there?
Not at all. There's a lovely word, torrential, there, which one would want to come back to, I think.
Well, excellent. Well, why don't we kick off with that, potentially with that moment of movement?
Well, because so much of the canto in its narrative form is concerned with the control of tempo and variation in tempo. So as a piece of Dantean narrative, it crystallizes so many of the things that Dante extensively is good at doing. But torrents come into it: the running of water, the speed of water, and then the contrast with the glacial. The Dante doesn't say glacial, the glacial slowness that is a contrast in. Let's leave aside the moral for the moment, but in terms of the actual rhythm of the canto.
It does it. It accelerates and it slows down with incredible virtuosity. Dante is amazing, isn't he? That kind of textual chiaroscuro. And I wonder whether this is one of the reasons why this canto hasn't necessarily received the attention that it so fully deserves, because we emerge from Canto 22, which is very, very noisy. It's full of external drama. And it sits just before the pair of cantos dedicated to the thieves, which again, they are visual, very visual. They are quick, they're gestural. There are pyrotechnics and all kinds of things. And then in the middle of those two noisy episodes, we've got this predominantly very slow, but also very kind of textured episode.
You keep using the word texture, and it's very interesting that you do. I wonder if you wanted to focus on particular examples of contrasted textures within the canto.
Certainly, yeah. So we've spoken a little bit about that, about the variations in pace of movement. So the leaden pace of the hypocrites as contrasted with Dante and Virgil's leap down the verge to make it into the bolge of the hypocrites. So we've got wonderful kind of physical accelerations and slowings down, but we've also got wonderful textures in terms of volume. This is a canto, after all, that begins taciti, soli, senza compagnia, silent, alone, without anybody else with us, as opposed to that very busy drama of the Malebranche that we've just come from. This is a canto that really dramatizes differences in sound as much as it does differences in speeds of movement. We have a really extraordinary moment in this canto of, well, I suppose what in academic jargon we'd call aposiopesis or ellipsis, a sudden breaking off of speech from Dante himself. It's one of two moments of this in the Commedia, both of which happen in Inferno. And so it's extraordinary that we get, as well as these variations in physical pace, also moments of speech and then sudden absolute silence.
Yes. I know you want to pick up on the notion of ellipsis in a very profound way. It matters a great deal to you, and it matters a great deal to Dante, I think. But could I just go back to the word texture, because I think that is a very fertile word in a very full sense, because your texture, clothing, touch, well, the speed that we're speaking about is in part illustrated by the mother who rushes from a burning house carrying her child without bothering to put on any clothing. Now that immediately triggers a concern with clothing and the textures of clothing, because that nakedness or almost nakedness compared with the leaden cloakedness, where there is texture, but a completely different kind. The texture associated with speed compared with the textures associated with the leaden weightiness of the cloak is there. And you could take it a bit further. If texture involves touch, then of course a lovely moment where Virgil picks up Dante and sticks him on his stomach and sledges down the slope torrentially, to use your word. And is compared to water running through a mill race. Again, textures. Okay, extending texture a little bit to notions of, or to images of light and glitter, or the lack of glitter, matters quite a bit in the canto.
It's
too, because of glittering cloaks and glittering compared with glittering water. The glittering cloak, lead doesn't glitter, does it? There are so many profound issues that I know you want to get onto. Last word, perhaps, for the moment about texture, and very significant in the intersection of the imaginative and the ethical, so to speak, is Caiaphas, naked, and puffing in his beard, soffiando nella barba. And if that isn't texture, I don't know what is, because you've got a kind of mock airiness in that, and you know, the whole image of a naked Caiaphas, crocifisso in tre palmi, with you've got both the crucifixion and the Trinity, and the weight of the world, the sins of the world being borne parodically by Caiaphas as everybody else tramples over him, expressed in and through this wonderful, wonderful sense of puffing in your beard, you know.
It is, again, it's a lovely textured moment. I mean, Calvino would have had a field day with this episode, you know, that idea of leggerezza and kind of gravezza.
Yes.
As we move towards that utterly substantial mezzo al quale ogni gravezza si rauna, that point at which all of the all heaviness kind of gathers with Lucifer, we really start to see a focus on materiality, but that is always set in this masterful kind of chiaroscuro against images of lightness.
Yeah, that's lovely. I wonder if we can, not too niftily, but just as part of the program, move on to the ellipsis that you're so concerned with, and quite rightly concerned with, because I think you probably can see it as a magnificently impressive moment within this canto, but I think you probably want to expand its significance beyond this canto, so that, again, this little regarded canto could prove, as it were, subatomically, to have explosive consequences for an understanding of Dante's whole position, or the whole writing of the Commedia. Take it away.
I think you're absolutely right, Robin, and it does. There are very clear links between this moment and other moments in the poem, not least, of course, the parallel moment in Inferno 9, outside the gates of Dis, where Virgil has his own moment of ellipsis, and the cracks in Virgil's authority and agency really start to show there. And Dante starts to extrapolate very, very negatively. He extracts a worse meaning, perhaps, than Virgil intends from that moment of silence. And I think the concern for us as readers here is that we run the risk of doing the same thing. O frati vostri mali And then, of course, the sentence is not finished. And we do the same as Dante does in that previous moment. We start to interpret, we start to fill in that void that ellipsis opens up. And we have to remember where we are here. We're among the hypocrites, and hypocrisy, of course, is a sin based on the idea that what is said and what is meant are two very, very different things. And we have to listen very, very carefully in this canto, particularly. And I think with that in mind, we cannot help but read potentially negatively into that moment of silence. We have to kind of fill in that void, and readers and interpreters of the Commedia have come up with all sorts of different interpretations of what that moment might mean. The irony, of course, being we simply cannot know. It is silence. It's devoid of any kind of linguistic meaning.
Yes, that's a very rich way of thinking about it. Two further thoughts, which I hope you can take away and give eloquent expression to. One is that a fairly obvious implication of the event is that Dante is about to judge. He's got, as far as identifying malady. Now, is he going to say, I sympathize with them, or I think there are heinous crimes that you've committed, or whatever? Now, that enters into the area of the uncertain, but it also initially casts doubt over the whole business of judgment, i.e., over the whole business of the Inferno. And I think, it's one of the sad effects of readers tending to read only the Inferno, that they don't realize just how modified the conception of judgment is when you move on. And there are any number of places maybe 5 or 6 places in the Paradiso where one's told not to judge, that Christians are told not to judge and be slow in judgment and so on. And this is a kind of anticipation of that. But it's radical insofar as it unseats that notion of a Dante who's full of himself, really, or hypocritically full of himself, you might say. And then just picking up on your ellipsis notion, the idea of gaps would surely again be illuminated by the Paradiso, which is, in terms of its poetics, built upon gaps. You don't describe God, thank heaven, you don't try, and it would be theologically ridiculous to try to circumscribe God in a human description. So we have gaps, and they're fertile. This comes back to your point about the value of the ambiguity, that what can flow from the gap could be anything, but it's not decided yet, and so the process continues. And I wonder if you've got any immediate rectifications of that sort of presumptuous interpretation of the ellipsis.
No, I don't think so. I think those interpretative questions are something that these moments very, very consciously open up. And what's very, very interesting about what we could very, very academically call the gappiness of the cantiche, of the individual cantiche. As we move forward, gaps in Inferno, those little omissions are almost always moments of doubt, and they are almost always to be interpreted negatively. And then as we move on to Purgatorio and Paradiso, gaps in knowledge become something to be celebrated. They are to be rectified and kind of rejoiced in Purgatorio, and then in extremis in Paradiso, gaps in knowledge become joyous things, don't they?
So nasce al piede del ver il dubbio in Canto 5. So doubt pushes us on from one step to another. Yes. That would make perfect sense. Do you see any ways in which hypocrisy is expanded, perhaps via the imaginative grip that we've got displayed in texture and in narrative tempo?
So I think it's very interesting, for a start, that this that this particular vice is set so low down in hell. Dante obviously treats it as a vice that is to be taken very seriously, and I think he absolutely does expand our conception of it in the sense that it is not just about going back on what one means or kind of saying what one does not mean. It becomes a sin based around that idea of having to listen. We have to listen so carefully, and we have to watch so attentively in this canto. We have to listen to those modulations in silence and speech. We have to look very carefully at that movement between bolge, between sort of swiftness and almost stillness. This is a canto where we have to switch on our interpretative faculties so acutely, I think.
Yeah. That's lovely. It does two things. One is it I think explains why Caiaphas is a hypocrite. I mean, it's not just that Caiaphas pretends to be something other than what he is. I mean, he is what he is. He's a Pharisee, and probably a jolly good Pharisee. Mm. But what he doesn't do is see the naked truth in front of himself and respond to the nuance and the electricity of the presence of Christ. So the hypocrisy is covering oneself up in a leaden cloak to avoid I'm going to get my physics wrong, but to avoid the radioactivity of the truth. Just let to protect you from that. Well, Caiaphas, the seeing Christ is still in the presence of, is not responding in the way that you actually suggest. The canto invites one to respond on one's nerve ends, on one's fingertips, in one's sense of tone and nuance and of texture and tempo. Mm. So he's left behind. It's a radical failure of life, really, of the possibilities of living in a vibrant sort of way. And actually, if you want to segue towards a conclusion for our times, then if you're saying how this links with the state of the world as we now inhabit it, then there are so many failures of language in this, but the failure of language to respond to nuance, whether it's in Twitters or in whatever other medium, not just Twitters, but would seem to be hypocritical that you're not taking account of the person at the other end. Of you're letting language do that without ellipsis, without interruption, without reflection back upon oneself. But
I think you're absolutely right, Robin, and that's a really interesting way, I think, in which this canto still speaks to us. We are able to have a constant, unbroken online presence these days, and we are able to exist in an online sphere which I need hardly reiterate is populated with fake news, with alternative facts, all that kind of stuff. It's hardly controversial to say that we live in an age where hypocrisy is alive and well, and we have constant access to it as well. And I wonder whether that intriguing moment of silence in this canto has something to say to us in these days as well. In a world in which we are constantly connected, I think we need to know what silence means when we hear it in those rare moments.
That could be taken in two ways. One is the silence which opens up perspectives which human words can't. I mean, divine perspectives in part, but also silence as part of language, as part of human language. You can't speak unless you can separate one word from another, unless you can have implicit full stops and so forth. So that the ellipsis is a powerful and emphatic form of what, in any case, a punctuation mark might be, and you need it if you're going to make sense. And a Twitter feed doesn't make sense, at least, well, I don't know what a Twitter feed is, so enlighten me. But
Well, we may have to do that another time because speaking of silence, the rest will have to be silence because we've reached the end of our time. But it's been wonderful to talk to you about this canto, Robin. I hope we have redeemed it somewhat for our viewers. All that remains for us to say is thank you very, very much for joining us. And thank you very much, Robin, for your discussion.
Well, thank you for the suggestion, Johnny. It's been a delight.